From servant's daughter to collector of kings, there was no one like Margaret Greville, and the royal jewels would sparkle less without her. The name Mrs. Ronnie Greville sets off shivers of delight among royal jewelry connoisseurs. Why? Because some of the most spectacular pieces in the House of Windsor's vault once belonged to this woman, born in St. John's Wood in 1863 as Margaret Helen Anderson. The working-class daughter of a Scottish servant, she inveigled her way into British aristocracy's inner circle, becoming revered by politicians and potentates. With charm and cunning, she rose from illegitimate obscurity to the highest echelons of Edwardian society, her unimaginable wealth matched only by the power and influence she wielded over the most prominent figures of the early 20th century. Hello and welcome to Royal Scandal. Please do well to like, subscribe, comment and turn on the notification bell so as not to miss out on any news updates. Margaret's life was laced with scandal from the off. Her registered parents were Helen and William Anderson, a serving girl and porter who shared the same surname but were unmarried. In fact, Margaret's true father was the bachelor William McEwen, millionaire founder of Edinburgh's Fountain Brewery, and boss of William Anderson. When Helen fell pregnant, McEwen enlisted this trusted and conveniently named employee in a plan that would spare his dependants the stigma of so-called bastardy. The pseudo-Mr. and Mrs. Anderson moved to London, where Margaret was born, before soon returning to Scotland. Helen, now a supposed widow, would go on to become an Edinburgh landlady. William returned to his family, in the same city, and was amply compensated for the subterfuge. In November 1885, the boarding-house matron Anderson and the fabulously wealthy McEwen were discreetly married in Pimlico, and the decades-old rumor of their dalliance became irrefutable. Margaret became McEwen's stepdaughter, and he let it be known that she would inherit his immense fortune. Whatever her origins, this made her quite a catch for the Hon Ronald Greville, son of the second Baron Greville, one of a generation of cash-strapped landed gentry who sought betrothal to new-money heiresses. Ronnie and Margaret married at St. Mark's Church in Mayfair on April 25, 1891. The bride wore white satin and Brussels lace, along with a diamond tiara worth £50,000, a gift from her stepfather. And so began Maggie Anderson's new life as Mrs. Ronnie Greville, a bona fide member of the blue-blooded elite. Thanks to their friendship with Alice Keppel, the favorite mistress of Bertie, Prince of Wales, the couple were ensconced in the future king's inner circle. In 1906, they bought Polesden Lacey, a grand country estate near Great Bookham, Surrey. They enlisted celebrated architects Charles Muse and Arthur Davis, who had recently designed London's Ritz Hotel, to refurbish it, and they spared no expense in creating a saloon fit for entertaining Maharajas, alongside a sumptuous private suite for their royal chum, now Edward VII. But before the sovereign could visit, Ronald Greville was diagnosed with cancer. He died of pneumonia in 1908 at the age of 43. And Margaret was forced to adopt the unexpected new persona of a society widow. She rallied with gumption, signaling her return to the social calendar by hosting her notoriously tricky monarch at Polesden Lacey. He remarked that she had a positive genius for hospitality, and so maintained her status among His Majesty's closest confidants. After he died in 1910, she befriended the new Queen Mary, wife of George V, with whom she shared a love of jewelry. The two women bought voraciously, commissioning and resetting jewels with abandon. Mrs. Greville frequented the likes of Cartier, Faberge and Gerard, had her pearls restrung yearly and remodeled her Boucheron tiara 4 times. According to one report, by Sir Conran Corfield, who met Mrs. Greville during a tour of India in 1921, she owned jewels which a Maharaja would envy, including emeralds, which seemed to cover her from forehead to fingers, and diamonds of equal magnificence and extent. In exchange for a reduction in insurance premiums, she traveled with copies of them all, secretly switching from fake to real and real to fake, so that no one knew which was which. She was not only rich but prudent, she was also very good company, concluded Corfield. In 1914, the childless Mrs. Greville let it be known that she intended to bequeath Polesden Lacey to Prince Albert, later known as George VI, and secured her position at court. After the First World War, she assumed the unofficial role of aristocratic matchmaker, helping to facilitate the marriage of her goddaughter Sonia Keppel and the Hon Roland Cubitt, as well as that of Prince Albert and the petite, pretty Lady Elizabeth Bowes-Lyon, the future queen consort. In 1920, Albert had been made Duke of York. In April 1923, he took his newlywed Duchess on a honeymoon to Polesden Lacey, staying in the private suite that Mrs. Greville, by then a dame, had designed for his grandfather. As a sexagenarian, Mrs. Greville continued to entertain and travel with the enthusiasm of a woman half her age. Although she had successfully ingratiated herself with stellar society, she remained a divisive character. For every glowing report of her marvelous personality, wide tolerance and all-embracing kindliness, there are accounts describing her as an old bag or a fat slug filled with venom. One Lady Leslie is said to have exclaimed, "Maggie Greville, I would sooner have an open sewer in my drawing room," and there is no doubt she had a venomous streak. "There is no one on earth quite so skillfully malicious as old Maggie," wrote politician Henry Chips Channon. After the 1936 abdication of Edward VIII, with whom Mrs. Greville had never managed to curry favor, her beloved Albert became George VI, and she sat in the royal box at his coronation. Despite failing health, the wheelchair-bound grande dame continued to don her finest jewels throughout the decade and into the Second World War. And rather than retreat to an air raid shelter, she sat out the Blitz by holding dinner parties in her suite at the Dorchester, decked out in her finest emeralds, because one might as well go out in style, writes Evans. Mrs. Greville joined King George and Queen Elizabeth at Balmoral for the last time in August 1942. On September 15 that year, she died at the Dorchester from a cerebral thrombosis. She was buried in the Ladies' Garden at Polesden-Lacey, and newspapers published tributes to her wit, perspicacity, and generosity. But her most significant legacy was the Greville bequest, the fruits of which are still not entirely publicly known. In the end, Mrs. Greville left Polesden-Lacey and its entire contents to the National Trust, rather than to the King. But she bequeathed with my loving thoughts more than 60 pieces of jewelry to Queen Elizabeth, the future Queen Mother. The latter would write to her widowed royal mother-in-law, "Mrs. Greville has left me her jewels, dear old thing, and I feel very touched. It is rather exciting to be left something, and I do admire beautiful stones with all my heart." And in return, she received this reply, "How kind of Mrs. Greville to leave you her jewels, and she had some lovely pearls and nice emeralds too, I think. I can understand your pleasure. I never had any such luck, but I am not really jealous." Despite her protests, Queen Mary was surely green-eyed when she saw the contents of the trunk marked MHG, Polesden-Lacey. The Greville bequest included the spectacular 5-row diamond festoon necklace, a suite of emeralds that reportedly belonged to Empress Josephine, several pairs of diamond earrings, brooches, and rings. Then there was the Boucheron honeycomb tiara, a favorite of George VI's wife, Queen Elizabeth. It has been frequently worn by Queen Camilla, who happens to be the great-granddaughter of Alice Keppel. Some believe the 5-carat emerald-cut diamond with which King Charles proposed to Camilla was also once owned by Mrs. Greville. Queen Elizabeth greatly enjoyed wearing Mrs. Greville's jewels, as did her daughter, Princess Elizabeth, later Elizabeth II, who was given Mrs. Greville's Cartier ivy leaf clips for her 21st birthday, in 1947, and her jaw-dropping Cartier chandelier earrings for her wedding the same year. Another favorite of both the Queen Mother and her daughter was a pair of Cartier earrings set with 2 pear-cut diamonds each weighing over 20 carats. When the Queen Mother died in 2002, the Greville jewels were inherited by Queen Elizabeth II, and they remain in regular use by working royals. The Boucheron emerald and diamond tiara worn by Princess Eugenie on her wedding day began its life as Margaret Greville's, as did the ruby and diamond Boucheron necklace worn by the then Duchess of Cambridge at a Spanish state banquet in 2017. Mrs. Ronnie's jewels radiate the splendor of a bygone era, one in which a lowly servant's daughter could successfully reinvent herself as a collector of kings. After her death, the then Queen, her beneficiary, wrote, "I shall miss her very much indeed. She was so shrewd, so kind and so amusingly unkind, so sharp, such fun, so naughty, altogether a real person, a character. Love her or hate her, there will never be another Margaret Greville." Thank you so much for watching. Please like and subscribe.